Welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. With the city of Kharkiv devastated, with Kyiv braced for an impending attack of a massive Russian convoy, we're asking, has the United States got it right? Are its tactics right over Ukraine? The strategy laid down by Joe Biden in his State of the Union speech is one of standing by President Volodymyr Zelensky. But seen from Kyiv, this might not feel like the real deal. Ukraine has welcomed extra military aid, some $350 million of extra cash from Washington, but at the same time appealing for more. A no-fly zone, for instance, at least would be nice, they say, to keep Russian war jets out of Ukraine's skies. Well, tonight our panel will be discussing the US stance, as well as digesting all the developments. And there are many coming out of Ukraine. Our guests here in the studio, Oleg Kopsev, Associate Professor at the American University of Paris. Oleg, thank you very much for being with us, sir. Great to see you. Joining us from Normandy is Joachim Bitterlich, former European diplomatic and security policy advisor to the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and former German ambassador to NATO 1998 to 1999. Thank you, sir, for being with us. In Moscow, we have Alexandra Filipenko, Senior Research Fellow, the Institute for US and Canadian Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Thank you for being with us. And joining us from Washington, our correspondent there, an observer of all matters for us at the White House, Kerevan Gorgistani. Kerevan, great to see you. First, let's hear US President Biden talking about Ukraine in his State of the Union address. Here's our report.
For his first State of the Union address, United States President Joe Biden rewrites his speech to focus not on the US, but on Russia. Calling Vladimir Putin a dictator, he said the Russian president must pay a price.
Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people.
Overshadowed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Biden spent his address delivering harsh words and announcing even harsher new sanctions.
We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy.
The announcement received a standing ovation.
He has no idea what's coming.
As Russia feels the force of the West's economic sanctions, Biden assures Americans they will not feel the effects of the penalties, saying the US will release 30 million barrels of oil from its reserves. On the House floor, Ukraine's ambassador to the US, sitting with the First Lady, met by a round of applause in a show of solidarity between DC and Kyiv.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Using his biggest platform of the year, Biden presented a more unified West as Russia continues its invasion.
Thanks to Sinead Coulson for that report. We've got a little bonus for you. Jessica Mazure joining us now from New York. She, of course, observing things at the UN for us, where there's been this, I'll call it unprecedented development, this vote at the Emergency General Assembly session to basically tell Russia to get out of Ukraine straight away. Jess, tell us about this.
Quite right. Well, Russia really, you could say, got pummeled here at the United Nations with this vote, with 141 countries voting in favour of the resolution, 35 abstaining and only 5 voting against. Russia, Belarus, Syria, North Korea and Eritrea. 10 countries didn't participate in that vote. But the UN Secretary General, following those results of the vote on the resolution, said really the UN General Assembly has spoken and the message is loud and clear. He said, end hostilities in Ukraine now and open the door to dialogue and diplomacy. Russia argued that, well, this resolution would do the opposite of that and would only embolden what it called radicals in Ukraine. But we heard from the US Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who was wearing blue and yellow in solidarity with Ukraine, and who, you might argue, drew a parallel between Putin and Hitler. She said that people in that hall might recall a moment when a European dictator declared he would return his empire to its former glory, an invasion that caused a war so horrific that it spurred this organisation into existence. It was very interesting to see which countries voted in favour, which countries abstained. The United Arab Emirates actually supported this resolution in the General Assembly despite abstaining in the Security Council last week. It had said that it wanted to leave room for dialogue, but it supported this resolution. In general, it looked like countries in the Arab world also were supporting this resolution, and long-standing allies of Russia also supported it, allies like Serbia. So that was interesting to note. Of course, all eyes were on the global south to see which way those countries would go. It seems that a lot of African countries did not end up, however, supporting the GA resolution. That might be down to the fact that Russia has growing influence on the continent. So really, yes, Russia looks very isolated right now here at the United Nations. But what kind of action will we see in the Security Council? That's really the question now.
Indeed. Jessica, continue to observe things for us. And thank you so much for your analysis. Jessica Lumzira there joining us from the UN. Thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our guests to talk about this. Oleg Koptsev, I'll begin with you, sir. And before you answer the question, I'd just like to sort of bring in the personal aspect to this whole story for you, because you've got family currently stuck in Ukraine.
Yes.
This must be an incredibly worrying time for you.
It's worse than having your parents dying from one from cancer or the other one from dementia. It's absolutely awful, and I can think of the millions of people who are going through the same thing abroad, where we're safe, or in Ukraine itself, where families might be separated.
I thought it was important to get this out in the open.
Thank you.
Because you're here to talk about things and to analyse things, and you've got that on your mind as well.
Yes.
So I think it adds extra weight to what you say here this evening. Do you feel,
Yes.
from what we're seeing and hearing, and there's been developments since we actually asked you to come in and talk about this, I mean, the thing at the UN, for instance, do you feel things are going in a way that can resolve the situation?
I'm afraid not. If you remember what I've been saying for years and years here in France 24, and if you add my impressions to my analysis of what is happening now in the past week, I could summarize everything that I have said over the past 30 years, including on France 24 for the past 15 years since you've existed. The United States has been, according to an old French expression, strong with the weak, weak with the strong. And this is why I'm very pessimistic about just what is being presented now with a lot of applause and enthusiasm at the U.S. Congress, but which to me is just some rhetoric. And I'm afraid that, no, I don't want to demoralize those who are resisting the invasion.
Oleg, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, the people resisting the invasion, we've been sort of reporting on how they're preparing, and it is very much ordinary people with very small weapons, but certainly many of them standing and saying they will fight. Oleg, thank you. Let's go to Moscow to Alexandra Filipenko of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Alexandra, from where you are, how will this UN resolution be received, do you think? How was Joe Biden's State of the Union remarks? How were they received?
Well, again, it's very difficult to, first of all, thank you for having me in this very difficult times, and thank you very much for a chance to speak out. Although I must make this disclaimer, being in Moscow, being in Russia, and having nowhere to go, I have to call this a special military operation, because it's forbidden for anyone to call what's happening a war, and that has a lot to do with your question, because Russian government and the Kremlin is trying to downplay the situation. They're trying to say that there is nothing special happening, that it's just a special military operation happening somewhere and helping. It's a special military operation that's designed to help the people of Ukraine. I don't, again, being in Moscow, I have to be very cautious, because according to this new law that's been published recently, anyone who provides any assistance, financial assistance, informational assistance, or the third part is very scary, any other kind of assistance, they are subject to 15 years in prison. So that is why, again, talking about Russian opposition and any chances for opposition here. So this special military operation and what Kremlin is trying to do is trying to downplay the situation, to say that we've been ready for sanctions, to say that everything is fine, there is nothing special happening, it's business as usual, to say that they're telling everyone, and on TV, on state Russian TV, they're saying that they've been ready and everything is fine. So they try to say as if nothing is happening, and they don't see this resolution, they don't see President Biden's State of the Union as something dangerous or as something menacing, or at least they're trying to show that that's how they think.
Alexandra, we hear what you're saying about the words that you have to choose carefully for your own safety. So obviously we respect that, but thank you for obviously being on this programme and sharing your views frankly as you are. We'll get back to you very shortly. So I think the gist of what Alexandra was saying there is that basically the Kremlin is not impressed by what Joe Biden's had to say. There's been another development, of course, talk about further sanctions regarding oil. Let's take a listen to the US President.
Mr. President, are you considering banning Russian oil imports?
Nothing is off the table.
Nothing is off the table. Ketevan Gorgeous starting in Washington. Nothing is off the table. Tell us more.
Yes, that's been the message from the Americans for several days, several weeks even before the Russian invasion. And you've been seeing really Washington leaving the door open to ramp up sanctions. So before you heard the president during his State of the Union speech announcing, for example, that the U.S. was banning its skies to Russian aircraft. Just that afternoon in a press briefing, the press secretary was asked about that possibility. And at the time she said, we have nothing new to announce, but all these sanctions are still on the table. So the oil sanctions are on the table. They've been on the table for a while, but it seems that Washington is viewing that as possibly the last resort sanctions against Vladimir Putin, because the message publicly and privately, the goal of the Americans, they've been repeating that over and over again, is to maximize the punishment and the impact on the Russian economy, while at the same time minimizing the impact of those sanctions on the global economy, and for the White House, of course, on the U.S. economy, because banning Russian oil imports, for example, in the U.S. would have severe consequences possibly on the U.S. economy, especially at a time when we're seeing rising inflation, rising gas prices. And so that's something that they're really not willing to do right now. But as we've seen in the past, and as I've said, we've seen the White House saying, we're not doing this right now, but it's still on the table, and just 2-3 days later, actually announcing that sanction that they were saying was not going to be done just yet.
Ketevan, for now, thank you very much indeed. Ketevan there, observing every development on this story for us from the Washington angle. Let's bring in someone with perhaps a deeper and wider analysis. Joachim Bitterlich, former European diplomatic and security policy advisor to the one-time German Chancellor. Helmut Kohl, former German ambassador to NATO. Joachim, thanks for being with us. I'm wondering, from your perspective, with your look on these things, how do you see this developing? Do you think the US has got it right?
I think I'm really preoccupied by the situation and by its development, because I take a bit more serious than certain people the threat of using nuclear weapons by the Russian side. I think I've been astonished in a positive way by the reaction of the Europeans, of the EU, and of the Americans doing things in time, at the same time, coordinated in a coherent way. And it's normal, when you look at sanctions, that they need still some sanctions in order to reinforce those existing. Those existing go far. I've never seen up till now sanctions like that. Please, I remember my first job in European affairs was in '81. And '81, I arrived in Brussels, and we were discussing sanctions against the Soviet Union because of Poland, because of the events in Poland. And I've been a witness where each and every member state was taking out of a list proposed by the Commission really severe things. And at the end, we had a silly list. This time, it was totally different for the first time. It was a real list of real sanctions, and I think they have been hitting the Russians. And it's normal that the Western countries have still, let's say, some certain things left out. And you have mentioned it, oil and gas. And this is, let's say, the last weapon the Western world has, and I don't have any doubt in the reaction of the Europeans. This applies to France, Germany, and Italy, and to the US, to extend these sanctions towards oil and gas. I've just read this afternoon the German government has been buying certain quantities of gas in order to survive for the winter months. I'm waiting for a reaction of two well-known French companies who do perhaps even a bit more than the Germans for Russia. But let's wait. But I don't have any doubt today in, let's say, in the Western world, and really an astonishing way with coherent sanctions, and this in a whole fast track, never seen before. And
Indeed.
therefore, the Russians will have to take seriously what this Western world is doing. But this Western world is fearing one step, is the direct intervention in Ukraine. I regret this for a Ukrainian colleague. It's the situation as such, but with an intervention of the West, I think the Russians would not hesitate 1 second, Putin, as he is, let's say, not rational with regard to the Ukraine, but purely emotional. And he would take, let's say, the nuclear option.
Indeed. Coming right back to where you started there. Joachim Bitterlich, thank you very much indeed. I'm wondering if there's a disconnect, Oleg, between what the diplomats are doing and the sanctions, and Joachim summed it up, and Kerevan talked about it too, the sanctions that are put into place and what people on the ground are calling for. You know, we've had reports from Lviv where people are setting up to try and fight off the Russians with a gun, with some sandbags. You know, people in Kyiv walking around with their own pistols, trying to sort of face up. And you think, well, it's one thing to talk about sanctions. These people clearly need some help. Is that boots on the ground? Is that sending in troops?
Well, sending in, you have a huge dilemma, because if you do send in troops, Putin might do exactly what he threatened, and that is to use nukes. On the other hand, he has threatened to use the nuclear weapon, and you can't just let somebody say that. I mean, the reaction to such a threat, in my opinion, is minimal. I mean, how can you not start now? Do you send troops on the ground? That would be very difficult. But what already should have been done days ago, before the invasion, for example, would have been to send massive naval or aviation units, maybe not to protect the borders of Ukraine, but just to be present in the region, in Poland, in the Baltic Sea, in the Black Sea. That would have sent out a signal. And since it hasn't been done, I think that is in part what encouraged Putin to attack. It's also, I think, to go back further, it's the withdrawal of the United States from Afghanistan. But that's, again, now this is all history. I'm afraid Mr. Bitterlich's remarks are overly optimistic. I'm sorry to say, with all due respect to his experience and my inexperience, I cannot not notice that a few days ago, when the war began, there was a meeting of European leaders, and Germany's position did not send out a very strong message. There was too much hesitation. Italy refused to close down Russian banks. Greece didn't want any sanctions at all, and we can continue the list like this. And France seeming to rush from one European country to the other, asking, well, how can we coordinate this? So
that could be interpreted as perhaps as Emmanuel Macron trying to coordinate
he's
it.
Trying to do something. Macron is not incompetent. By the way, Macron, let's not put him down. He is very well advised. And I remember we discussed this with very different people here when Macron became president and greeted Putin to France in Versailles. He is his counselors on Russian affairs are quite good. So he is trying to play a role, but again, the general impression is just not strong enough. Now, again, if we send troops on the ground, boots on the ground, that could lead to the apocalypse. Let's not. We're no longer in a science fiction movie. We are in reality. Unfortunately, that's the reality. This is the risk that we are facing, because when Putin makes a threat, now we know that he's going to do something even more than what he says. If he threatens nukes, he might do it. So, of course, sending in troops, which could have been efficient in the first minutes, that would start World War III. On the other hand, we cannot just accept the threats of nukes with with just punishing a few hundred oligarchs on the French coast, on the French Mediterranean coast, or a few banks and a few businesses here and there. It has to be much stronger.
Let me stop you, Oleg. Joachim wants to come back in. But after that, well, Joachim next. Let's come back to try and get from Kedevan and Alexandra more thoughts on Biden's actual sort of policies and what he said. But Joachim, you have a reply, I think. Go ahead.
I disagree. I regret, because I would like to know what you would do exactly. I think
it's a good question.
Any European member state, either France or Germany has totally changed its position within 72 hours, and having gone much more far than the French even. And therefore, what should we do more? Please, my next step would be, let's say, to stop any imports of gas from Russia, but this would stop Nord Stream 1, stop the pipe through Poland and Belarus. But what to do with the poor Ukrainians who need the same gas for their heating systems? What to do?
Indeed. Joachim, let me pause you. Let me put that question to Alexandra in Moscow to try and get a reverse angle on this, perhaps. Yes. Alexandra Filipenko, if you can still hear us, I don't know whether you follow what's been said, but what would Putin not want to have happened, for instance? Would he have reacted differently had there been a stronger reaction, say, from Germany, say a stronger reaction from the US?
I think, first of all, that really that of a strong reaction from Germany was not expected, because we know what Olaf Scholz has been saying before that special military operation, and he's been saying that the Nord Stream pipeline wouldn't be that closing down the Nord Stream pipeline wouldn't happen, but now we see it happening. And of course, first of all natural resources. This is the resource, let's say, of Putin's government. First of all, that's the main resource, and that's what they are standing on. But again, yes, that point absolutely, because Ukrainians need that same gas. Polish people need that same gas, and this is a very difficult issue. And we know that natural resources have been Putin's main, let's say, playing card, if we can put it this way. And I would absolutely, although I would absolutely agree with Oleg, because President Putin is known for raising rates. He always raises. He doesn't like to back down. So we've seen what's been happening. We should remember Georgia, August 2008. We should remember Crimea, the annexation of Crimea. It's still allowed to say those words, I think, in 2014. But
Alexandra, I have to stop you. We need to go to Jens Stoltenberg of NATO, who is speaking right now. We'll come back to you shortly. First, let's go to Jens Stoltenberg speaking, the NATO Secretary General.
And the NATO allies are also providing significant support to Ukraine. We are not part of the conflict, we will not be part of the conflict. NATO will not be on the ground with forces, soldiers in Ukraine, and will not be in the airspace of Ukraine. But we support the Ukrainian government, and we support them with military aid, but also allies also provide humanitarian support and financial support.
Thank you so much. Prime Minister, are you hoping that you will discuss with the Secretary General to take further action against Russia?
I think we are going to evaluate really the change that this might have
there will be
on the
no
future
NATO troops put on the ground at all. I don't think there's any surprise in that, Oleg, is that at all. Let's go back to Alexandra Filipenko, who was making that point about how perhaps the reaction from the allies, let's put it that way, because I think obviously we can talk about this as being Biden's Ukraine strategy, but it's also NATO's, it's also the EU. There's so much of a dovetailing on this issue. Maybe the reaction was something that in some way played into Vladimir Putin's hands, Alexandra. Is that fair to say?
Well, somewhat. Again, they've been preparing. They've been preparing the financial cushion. They've been preparing for the sanctions. I don't think that what they've been preparing for is the strength of Ukrainian people. That was the main miscalculation. They didn't expect Ukrainians to be that strong, and they didn't expect President Zelensky to be that strong of a leader and to show himself as a real hero of what is going on. So of that, again, special military operation. And I think those were the main miscalculations, because probably we must say that President Biden's, if I can put it this way, spies were right regarding the special military operation. I'm sorry. And they were right that Putin was ready to start it all. And probably they were right to offer President Zelensky a way out in the first days. But he refused, and he stayed there. And that is why the whole world is seeing Ukraine and Ukrainian leader as a hero. So I think that was the first miscalculation. That was the what Kremlin expected, first of all, for Ukraine to basically, I wouldn't say give up, but at least do not have that much of strength. So right now, that special military operation is taking too long, much longer than expected, probably. And for now, I think the main point is to have an unconditional ceasefire. Although we know that the Russian side wants Crimea to be accepted as part of Russia. They want Donetsk and Luhansk republics to be accepted in their administrative borders, not in the borders of those and not in the military borders that they've been before, because we know that the republics are just 1/3 of the region. So those are probably non-starters for talks right now. But for now, we need that unconditional ceasefire, and later to hold on talks. And of course, gas supplies, of course, natural resource supplies is the main cushion again of Russian government. And if Europe, if the United States, if everyone stops buying those resources, that would be the main blow, I would say. But for now, again, this financial cushion is quite comfortable, and probably a Russian elite and Russian government is still quite comfortable in their seats. We didn't see anyone leave their posts. So again, they're trying to say it's business as usual.
Alexandra, thank you very much indeed. Over 2,000 people arrested in anti-war protests in Russia since this invasion began, a special military operation, as Vladimir Putin is calling it. Let's go to Kerevan in Washington for more on the kind of Biden angle, I suppose. Kerevan, Volodymyr Zelensky calling for at least a no-fly zone. Can you give us some context as to why that's a non-starter as far as Joe Biden's concerned?
Because Joe Biden has been extremely clear. And on that, the Biden administration has not wavered ever since the very beginning of the first signs of military buildup on the Ukraine-Russia border. That message has been clear from the beginning. The U.S. president saying that he would not, under any circumstance, send U.S. troops to Ukraine to fight Russia. In an interview, he was asked, would you even send U.S. troops to evacuate American citizens in case of a war? He said, no, I will not send U.S. troops under any circumstance, because if I do send troops and Americans start shooting at Russians, this is a world war. So that was, from the beginning, something that was never on the table, and it doesn't look like it's going to be on the table anytime soon. And the no-fly zone is sort of going into that, and he hasn't really addressed the no-fly zone per se, but members of his administration, of his cabinet have. And the idea is the same. If they impose a no-fly zone, that means what? That U.S. military jets could shoot down Russian military jets. That gives the same result, basically, as if they were shooting at each other on the ground. So nothing on the ground, nothing in the air. That is something that the U.S. president is not willing to do. The question is, how long can that position last if we see the situation on the ground getting worse and worse? If we see more and more hundreds and thousands of civilians being attacked, being targeted directly by the Russian, as we've been seeing in recent hours, how long is that position sustainable? That said, the president has insisted that they will do everything else in their power. Military aid, just this weekend, $350 million in military aid sent over to Ukraine, bringing the total of the past year to about $1 billion in military assistance, humanitarian assistance, economic assistance, and of course, that presence, military presence on NATO's eastern flank, thousands of troops being sent over from the United States to Eastern Europe to shore up those defenses. And that is also something that President Biden made extremely clear. He said, we will not go into Ukraine, but if Vladimir Putin touches any inch of NATO territory, then he will be met with the full force of the NATO alliance.
Okay. And that is a very scary statement, but nonetheless, we see the balance and the clarity in that, Ketevan. Thank you very much for pointing all that out to us. Ketevan Gorgistani, our Washington correspondent. You may have heard Oleg correcting me on the figures of people arrested. It's something like 7,000?
According to my sources, but of course it's difficult to know it. According to my sources, it's 6,000 arrests after the demonstrations that we saw in different cities of Russia, particularly in St. Petersburg. On that subject, I want to pay my respects to Alexandra Filipenko, who's working in a great department of North American studies, and she is continuing the tradition of Nikolai Nikolaevich Bolkhovitinov, who I worked with, who I knew very well, and who was a hero under the Soviet Union, and he was helping dissidents at the time. I just wanted to say it. Держитесь.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm sorry for getting in, but on that note, I would like to say that, again, in this Orwellian world, I have to say that I was just passing by those people arrested in Moscow. I was just passing by. But it's amazing to see people screaming no to war, being arrested and standing with the flags that just say no to war, and they're being arrested in Moscow and St. Petersburg and other cities. And that's the whole other issue of how people can protest and what people can do in Russia. That's the whole other different big story. But again, Oleg, thank you so much for saying those words. And I think you understand like no one else what is happening right now.
Alexandra, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Joachim Bitterlich, the former advisor to Helmut Kohl, German Chancellor, former German ambassador to NATO. Joachim, Ketevan in Washington was very clear in explaining where Joe Biden stands on this idea of the no-fly zone. Do you feel, nonetheless, if NATO could push that far to do that, it might help matters? It might give Zelensky a bit of breathing space?
It should be more important to deliver the right arms to him. I don't think the Americans would go beyond. I don't think so. nor the British as strong allies. But I've one ending remark. The Ukraine, and we have to bear this in mind, the Ukraine is for Putin, let's say, the first step. We owe this. In the sense he wants to, let's say, to solidify the Russian Federation by reintegrating, by taking over the Ukraine. But his target is much larger than Ukraine. Its target is in reality nothing less than the European order created, let's say, in 1990, or let's say since World War II. This is the danger we are confronted with. And therefore, I think NATO has clearly to show its force to what we call the limits of Russia. But I would put a question to Alexandra Filipenko. She has my deep respect for talking to us here. Some years ago, I say this openly here, I discussed in Moscow the whole story about the Ukraine and these subjects with the Russian side. I mean, we were a small group of people from France, Britain, Germany, and some Russians. And the Russians were, let's say, some people not near abroad, but near too. And they asked me at the end what, and because in my eyes, diplomacy has to come back urgently in order to look for a solution acceptable to the Ukrainian people, first of all, and to stop bombing and to stop, let's say, hurting and killing normal people. I've been a witness of this few students of mine last week. But how to get back diplomacy? This is for me one of the key. I heard some remarks in France. I have a bit laughing at it. And I know only one European who could be able, let's say, to talk to Putin and to ask him to come back, let's say, to the table of negotiation. It's for me, it's the Finnish president, is the minister. It's the only one I see. And the other hand,
so not Emmanuel Macron then? No?
I discussed 3 years ago the subject. My thesis was the Russians should finally accept to recognize the territorial integrity of Ukraine and its sovereignty, because the Russians, as a matter of fact, have not accepted it in the past, despite of his agreement in Budapest, but this was, let's call it the withdrawal of nukes agreement. And the second thing, for me, let's say 3 years ago, and I beg your pardon to mention this, was assurance of non-alignment of the Ukraine, but guaranteed, let's say, by all important powers, including the US, including France, Germany, and Britain, including especially Poland. And third, let's say, a federal state of the Ukraine, in order to, let's say, to take away from Putin any argument, let's say, to be aggressive. And a non-aligned state, but at the same time with a association agreement to the European Union and, let's say, an open agreement towards the economy, to the EU in the East, in order to help, let's say, at least for the next 25 years, 30 years, the state building, a nation building in the Ukraine, and to stabilize that country, finally. This was my proposal. I don't know whether it's still possible with the Russians. What are you thinking, Alexandra?
Joachim, I need to stop you there because we're out of time, so you've eaten up the final bit of the programme, but we love what you were saying, but sadly we are out of time now. So Alexandra, I'm sorry, I can't give you the right to reply on that one or even a thought. Alexandra Filipenko, the Russian Academy of Sciences, thank you. Thanks to Ketevan Gorjestani in Washington. Thank you to Joachim Bitterlich, joining us from Normandy, the former German ambassador to NATO, and thanks to Oleg Kobzev here in the studio for being here. Thanks to you for watching. Stay with us. More to come. And of course, our coverage of events in Ukraine continues.